Hello everybody, my name is Roger and welcome to my channel Rogers Reads. So today I'm bringing you another book review, this one entitled Undead Girl Gang by Lily Anderson. And you know, once I read the quirky synopsis of this story, I was instantly hooked and couldn't wait to get my hands on this book. I was not disappointed and I ended up loving the story from beginning to end. So the story. When Mila's best friend Riley shows up dead in a nearby creek and police label her death a suicide, Mila is beside herself. Though devastated and stricken with grief, she knows deep down in her heart that Riley would never ever kill herself. And she repeatedly insists to her parents as well as school administrators that Riley had to have been murdered. Moreover, Riley's is the third death at her school in the past week, which smells like way too much of a coincidence for Mila. Now, it's worth mentioning that Mila and Riley were both Wiccan, and up to this point had done some minor spell work together. But when a curious and ancient grimoire that contains a resurrection spell appears at Mila's doorstep, she can't resist the temptation. Now, given that none of the authority figures in her life believe her theory about Riley's death, she then decides to take matters in her own hands and cast the spell. It's the only way that she can find out what really happened to her friend. So, she works the spell. However, it brings back not only Riley, but also snobby mean girls June and Dayton, her two classmates who had supposedly hung themselves a week earlier in some sort of suicide pact. Unfortunately, none of the girls can recall the specifics of their death, but they are all certain that they would never commit suicide. So, now with 7 days until the spell wears off, meaning that the three girls will return to their graves at that time, Mila, along with her three undead friends, race against the clock to find out who murdered them before he or she can find their next victim. So, on to what I liked. I really enjoyed having a Wiccan main character in the book, which I found fascinating and refreshing. I thought the author did an excellent job in portraying Wicca and delineating the difference between Wicca and witchcraft. Also, one of the tenets of Wicca is the law of three, in which everything a witch does, especially in regards to spell work, comes back to them threefold, for good or for ill. So I found it especially clever that Mila, instead of bringing only her friend back to life, ended up restoring life to all three of the recently deceased classmates, a humorous nod to the law of three. Though we do learn later on at the end of the book why June and Dayton ended up coming back to life in addition to Riley. I loved her main character, Mila, a plus-sized, snarky Mexican witch who could care less about what other people thought about her and who did whatever was necessary to find justice for her friend Riley and her two undead companions. Her confidence and determination were really impressive, as was her devotion to Riley and her two undead friends. So that being said, Undead Girl Gang was an exploration of not only grief and loss, but also of friendship. And the fact that Mila is fat has nothing to do with the plot, and the story does not dwell on this fact at all. So in this way, I found the representation in the book refreshing. Now, there's also a scene in the book where the characters are called out for implying that Normal is white. Though it was a small scene, it was one that especially stood out for me. I think they were talking about going to a restaurants, and somebody mentioned a Thai restaurant, and the other girl said, "No, I want to go to a normal restaurant." And let me find that. I do have that quote handy here, relatively handy here. So here's the exact quote. "And for fuck's sake, stop using normal as code for white," I snap. "Your life isn't the ruler that the rest of the world gets measured against." So I really liked that quote so much that I wanted to include it in this review. I really thought this book was wildly creative. There was one stipulation of the spell which I found clever, which made the three undead girls especially frightening should anybody encounter them. I really love the author's original and entertaining take on the zombies in this story. So instead of giving us terrifying brain-eating zombies, we get three cranky and snarky undead teenagers who, much to Mila's chagrin, are impossible to control and think nothing of walking down the street during broad daylight in a town where they were recently killed, or even showing up to terrorize people at their own memorial. Now, that being said, it was also fun watching the girls interact with each other. Now, it's worth mentioning that Riley and Mila were not on friendly terms with June and Dayton while they were alive, so there were some personality clashes going on in the story, which resulted actually in some great humor. The snarkiness, feistiness, sarcasm, backhanded insults, and cattiness really had me laughing out loud on several occasions. The interaction of the four girls was so much fun and really warmed my heart, especially when unlikely friendships developed between them. It's at this point the reader discovers that the book is not really about zombies and a serial killer, but it's also about the complex relationships between teenage girls. So in addition to the outstanding humor, I also found the magic system especially intriguing. I enjoyed reading about the different spells as well as the materials and rituals necessary for the spells to work. It was in the magic system where the difference between Wicca and witchcraft came into play. Now we learned that though Mila adhered to the Wiccan faith, the magic that she used from the old grimoire to bring the girls back was not Wiccan magic at all, but rather a dark, more ancient magic. And as is the case with most magic systems, magic always comes with a price. The mystery aspect of the story was quite well done, I thought, and the story took several exciting twists and turns until the killer is finally revealed. Now, as the clock ticked down, I found myself entirely invested in finding out who killed the girls. And though I did suspect the murderer's identity, I wasn't quite sure, and I was still surprised when it all unfolded. The big reveal was perfect, I felt, with the story being nicely tied up at the end. So on to what I didn't like. There honestly wasn't a whole lot that I disliked about the book. There were a couple of pacing issues, maybe, I felt. The middle of the story dragged a little tiny bit, and the ending did feel a bit rushed. I also wished the book would have gone into more detail about the Wiccan faith. It would have been interesting to learn more about how Riley and Mila got into Wicca and their past experiences with it. A little more in-depth explanation of the differences between Wicca and witchcraft might have also been helpful. I also felt that the undead girls were extremely stereotypical. Here we have the mean girls who rule the school trope. There were a couple of times when I felt that the depiction was a tad over the top, and initially the girls felt more like caricatures than real people. There was also one little thing that bugged me, and this is kind of weird, but Mila's sister gives her a rubber hairband that she's supposed to snap against her wrist whenever grief overcomes her, and she does this on several occasions. The idea of harming yourself or causing yourself pain to overcome emotional grief or any unpleasant emotions, that whole idea just did not sit well with me at all, and I actually found it rather disconcerting. I'm also not sure if I'm entirely on board with the murderer's reasoning for killing the girls. It seemed a little far-fetched to me and perhaps more than a little bit unbelievable. So on to the final verdict. Zombies, witches, serial killers, and a mystery to solve. What's not to love? Now, this was really a fun, lighthearted, yet serious look at friendship, redemption, grief, and moving on. And it was a fast read with a whole lot going on that kept me turning the pages. And though there were murder and mystery elements to the story, it was about so much more than that. We have here a candid social commentary on high school hierarchies, on keeping up appearances, on belonging, and on friendship, with a particular focus on relationships in this story. This is one of those books that keeps you thinking long after the last page is turned. It was a story with depth to it, I felt. Though Undead Girl Gang deals with some serious topics, it does do so in a humorous, over-the-top way. This might have been one of the funniest books that I've read so far this year, or at least tied with another one. The four girls ended up being wholly lovable and relatable by the end of the story, and I loved how they all came together at the end. It was also satisfying to see the depth each character had by the end of the book and the growth that took place for each of them. So this was a clever, charming, and entertaining read with a beautiful ending and an engaging plot. The author really brought her characters to life in this story, so overall I ended up loving it, and I gave it 5 stars. So how about you? Did you read Undead Girl Gang? What did you think of it? Let me know in the comments. And if you like this video, I'd really appreciate it if you give it a thumbs up. And that's it for this time. As always, I thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate all of your support, and I will talk to you in the next video. Bye-bye.